For 2024, Africa's unemployment rate was projected at about 7%, with South Africa leading with about 30% of that margin on the continent. We're being joined by Dr. D.N Kabani from Zambia this morning, who is himself the CEO, D.N General Consultancy, and who is a solutions provider for business startups and also a pharmacist. Good afternoon, Dr. Kabani. Thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to all the viewers that are with us across the globe.
How is Zambia today?
Zambia is very fine. We are getting some good rain this year. We had a drought last year. Otherwise, we are okay.
Oh wow, that must be great news. Right, so we want to look at the case of unemployment on the continent. The statistics are quite staggering, with several millions of young persons, the productive, what would I call them, demography now unemployed on the continent. So we want to look into why this is so. But generally, in your interface, especially with startups, what's the case for unemployment on the continent?
Okay, so unemployment currently is a huge challenge on the African continent, especially when we look at sub-Saharan Africa. North Africa seems to be doing fine, but sub-Saharan Africa is quite challenged. And within the space of small and medium enterprises, there is often also a challenge that most of the businesses are struggling to thrive. Very few of them manage to cross the 3.5 years mark for them to become established. And these challenges may come from such issues as lack of financing, challenges in terms of accessing financing, ecosystems that don't really sustain the growth of small and medium enterprises. This in itself trickles down in these small businesses, failing to create employment, and yet they are the major players in terms of employment across the continent.
Okay, so we know that only 1 in 6 African youths are actually employed. And when I even say employed, wage employed for that matter, because on the continent, the number that actually makes for what a lot of people call employment is either self-employment or they're privately employed, which also counts for something. What are some of the indices that are causative factors for unemployment on the continent?
Okay, so some of the factors that are actually leading to unemployment goes to such things as, education job mismatch. So we are currently generating a number of graduates, of whom much of them do not possess the skills that the current economies are looking for. You're going to realize that much of the young people that are going through our universities, they graduate, and when they come to look for jobs, if you are an employer, you will realize that they actually need to be retrained for them to possess the basic skills that are needed for them to perform the jobs that are currently on the market. So skills mismatch in terms of education is contributing to unemployment. Another thing contributing to this is insufficient industrialization. I should mention that personally, I've been an advocate for Africa to undergo industrialization. When the whole globe was undergoing industrial revolution, we as Africa did not go through it. Unfortunately, we have had to leap into now the digital revolution without going through industrialization at the level of mechanizing and automating most of the processes. Industrialization in Europe came with job creation because, agriculture was industrialized. You look at transport and logistics was industrialized. Food production was done. Africa missed this. And because we missed this, we are importing things. We are simply generating raw materials without value addition. We send them over to the West for value addition, and these things come back. But we should understand that where value addition happens, that is where jobs are created. So right in Europe, where our coffee is processed, right in Europe, where you get our minerals processed, our timber processed, that is where jobs are created. So until we localize value addition as African countries, we will not see a rise in job creation and a drop in unemployment. I should also mention that political instability is another contributing factor to unemployment because of the instability that is created. When nations are unstable because of war and such things, investors don't move in. So if you look at countries like Congo, among others, Somalia, and many others that have been at war for many years, these countries don't get investors coming in because it is a risk to any investor. And by so doing, you see that unemployment goes up because you are failing to get investors, even both local and foreign investors coming in to establish industries that should create employment. Another factor is actually weak policy implementation. Many of our governments have good policies which are normally not implemented to the latter. When you actually, when you decide to look through this issue, you're going to realize, for example, very few countries have what is called an SME policy, as an example, a policy that would look at developing, small and medium enterprises so that they can actually scale up into full corporation. But such policies allow the growth of small businesses, which then go on to create employment. But even for the countries that have these policies are not implemented. There's an interesting survey that you may want to look at, which is called the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor. This is a very big survey that normally looks at how entrepreneurial activities are happening in different countries. When you look at that survey done here in Africa around 2013, you are going to realize that one of the challenges to the development of small businesses, which are a great driver in creating employment, is that there are no policies to support these small businesses. And later on, even in countries where you have these policies, they are not properly implemented. And probably the last one I would want to highlight is rapid population growth. Our population is growing at a rate way faster than the rate at which our economies are growing. For example, if you look at fertility here in Africa, it's very high, standing at 4 children per every woman, okay? Per every woman. And yet, if you are going to look at this in comparison with the global rates stand at 2.5. It is estimated that we are going to see the population of Africa doubling by 2050, from the current about 1.5 billion to about 2.5 billion. The question is, as our population is growing that fast, do we see our economies also growing in a way that matches that growth to create employment? So population expansion is also something that is leading to unemployment. So those are some of the factors that are at play in terms of the rise in unemployment.
Okay, so 2 key things that you have thrown up. Investments in key sectors on the continent seems to be a problem. So industrialization hasn't even, found its place on the continent and in our economies. So side by side, I'm going to ask you to talk about investments in key sectors and the fact that Africa, especially if you look at West Africa, use Nigeria as case study, there's a really strong tilt to entrepreneurship, which now seems to be doing most of the employment of the unemployed ratio as opposed to wage employment, people that can receive pension and the like. So when we look at these 2 things, lack of investment and the springing up of entrepreneurship, where and how can we find a good balance for all of this?
Okay. Well, I should mention that these 2 are able to play together. What needs to be done is to create an enabling environment for both. So on one side, if we look at entrepreneurship, we have good policies that are being created, integration of regions. We know of the Africa Free Trade, area that has been created in the map to allow for countries actually to trade with each other. That is very good. But what we should highlight within this is that it is important that countries come up with development agencies, local development agencies, whose purpose is focused mainly at developing the local entrepreneurs. If you look at certain economies, for example, China, you look at India, you look at Singapore, you look at Israel, you are going to realize that these countries have invested into systems and policies that develop their local entrepreneurs. They have created innovation hubs, as an example. These are some of the things that can be done within our local countries. Create local innovation hubs that can provide incubation, services, accelerator programs to support the local entrepreneurs. Because one of the leading causes of failure in terms of business for small and medium enterprises is actually a lack of entrepreneurial skills. Away from other factors such as lack of access to, capital and financing, but also just the skills. An average entrepreneur may not be very well vested in issues of management, in issues of strategy, in issues of marketing, and many other things. So we can actually support the local entrepreneurs, and this will create employment. Now, we need to strike a balance between supporting the local entrepreneurs and creating an environment that brings in investors. Because remember, many of the companies that come in as foreign direct investment, these investors definitely are coming from countries away from Africa. And this is where we realize that when they have established themselves, they have industrialized, there are capital flights in terms of money flying out of Africa. Much as they may create employment, on the other side, we should understand that unemployment is a secondary problem. We do not want to get in a space where we only have the jobs, but the minerals are going out of Africa. We only have the jobs, but our timber is going out. We only have the jobs, but our coffee is going out. So a balance must be struck between bringing in investment and supporting the local businesses.
Okay. Just two things before we wrap up. Labor standards on the continent is a major problem for the more developed economies on the continent. Maybe you're talking about stable economies like Rwanda, and maybe for some lack of better examples, Nigeria is also doing well economically if you exempt the last 1 year activity, but we have a good trajectory. What do you think about labor standards on the continent? Are we doing well with the laws and policies guiding us? What can our lawmakers do better?
Yes, actually, that is another very important issue that should be addressed. When you look at a number of surveys published by the International Labour Organization, you are going to realize that labor standards are very low. Majority of our youths especially are more passionate about youths, and majority of our youths are employed in the informal sector. Many of these, what they get is below what would be the minimum wage actually for the countries in which they work. Every country establishes what its minimum wage is going to be. But when you move into these local economies, you're going to realize that many people are getting paid what is below the minimum wage. And you're also going to realize that a number of people that are working in much of our industry, and unfortunately, sometimes even from very big multinationals that come in, issues of safety, for example, are not met. If you go in some of these mines and industries that are on the continent, those that are working in oil companies, you're going to realize that our people, our youth, are being subjected to health hazards in terms of occupational safety that is very low. So we need to look at actually standards and ensure that this is actually harmonized with what is obtaining on the global labor market.
Okay.
It is unfortunate that sometimes companies that are paying people very well in terms of in Europe and other places, when they come here in Africa, they are paying people peanuts. And this is where we need to strengthen our labor organizations within the different countries in which we are. This calls for leadership within countries. This calls for labor movements. It is very important that labor movements, unions are strengthened within working environments and organizations. The people that are working affiliated with these organizations that can look and ensure that the standards of work speak to a decent life.
All right, then, just before I let you go, I'd like to take a word for, African youth. Usually, in the space of all that we are experiencing, what approach should an African youth take now? If you've also followed the conversation, in Nigeria, we call it the Japa syndrome. Everybody wants to move to Europe. We have a lot of cases for sinking ships off the coast because people are trying to get to Europe for better life and all the likes. And also the conversation of disguised employment where it's not affecting the economic aggregate of each country. What position should African youth, the productive population, be taking now? How can we ready ourselves for future jobs?
That's a great one. We need to understand that the greatest resource that Africa actually has is its human resource. Okay, one of the books I love is a book titled The Challenge for Africa by Wangari Maathai. And in there, actually highlights the same thing. The greatest resource that Africa has is its people. And this could be explained even at a physiological level. An African is wired to survive. We can survive the harshest of. You're going to compare Africans in terms of ethnicity and their body physiology. You're going to realize that we are wired to survive anything. But again, when you come to demographics, you're going to realize that the current median age of Africa stands at 19.2 years. That means that on average, Africa has more youths than elderly people. What does that mean? The future is Africa. If you're going to look at the demographic distribution, Africa's distribution actually is a pyramid, which is standing. Okay, at the base, you have youths and very few elderly people at the top. Europe has an inverted pyramid in terms of its demographic. Very few youths, and literally the top there are elderly people. This means that everybody is looking to Africa. And while African youths are thinking of leaving Africa and going to Europe, Europe is coming to Africa. Europe is coming to Africa because Africa has arable land. Europe is coming to Africa because Africa has the fresh water bodies. Europe is coming to Africa because Africa has the right climate for agriculture. Europe is coming to Africa because Africa has the minerals. Europe is coming to Africa because Africa has cheap labor. Now, this is what African youths should actually target to tap into. They should begin to look at how do you strategically position yourself for a new world order that is coming, and that order is where Africa is going to be in the lead. Africa, in terms of, even when you look at natural resources, in terms of drug development, we have all the things that are needed for drug development in terms of plants from which we can extract all of these things. We can run manufacturing plants right here on Africa. There's integration that is happening, like I said, of regions now. ECOWAS, SADC, and all of these are integrating into a single market. So Africa is the future. Now, what are the things that an African youth should do to make himself relevant? This globalization that is happening has advantages and it has disadvantages. The advantage is that you have access to markets beyond your current market, wherever you are, whether in Egypt, in Somalia, in Nigeria, in Niger, wherever you are. But the disadvantage is that this is going to open you to competition beyond the local competition that you have had. So every African youth should ask themselves a question to say, am I competitive beyond my immediate local environment? Or I only have skills which make me competitive amidst my peers within my immediate locality. So there are skills that African youths must begin to develop. One of them are digital skills, because the digital revolution is here, okay, 4.0. We're talking of artificial intelligence. We are talking of robotics. We are talking of the Internet of all things. These are things that young Africans must invest themselves in. But other lines that African youths can think about are issues of talent development. One of the things you're going to realize very quickly is that an African generally is very talented. So young people must harness their talents in terms of athletics, in terms of, football and whatever it is. But young people can look at that. Young people should also look at networking. If you're in Nigeria, can you begin to formulate networks in Zambia? If you're in Zambia, can you network with your fellow youths in Cote d'Ivoire? If you are in Mali, can you network with those that are in Eswatini? Because we are getting to where you can be seated in Eswatini but selling things in Algeria. You can be in Algeria selling courses in Namibia. So young people must position themselves in such a way. What often worries me is that I tend to realize that majority of our youths are more inclined towards entertainment. They are more inclined towards entertainment. And there is little that is happening in terms of self-development. Much of our young people are okay with simply getting a qualification and saying, I have a degree, I have a master's, or I have a PhD, even when they have not learned how to monetize those qualifications that they have. But now is the time to look beyond mere qualifications to begin building competences and skills that are relevant for such a time as this. Sometimes when we run even adverts as a company, in our companies, we see applicants applying all the way from India, much of them from India and Asia. But I don't see applications coming from Cameroon. I don't see applications coming from, West Africa to what we are advertising. But how is it that the youths of India are following issues to the level that they can make applications and compete for jobs in Zambia, and yet the youths from the next door country, Namibia, don't even know that there are such opportunities? So young people must be deliberate. They must run away from a dependence syndrome. And when I'm talking about dependence syndrome now, I am talking about some hangover of colonialism that built an African into thinking that the government will always provide solutions for your personal problem. So young people must begin thinking of how they are co-partners with their governments in developing themselves. Personal development.
Right.
Thank you.
All right, great conversation that we've had with you. Very key points: self-development, monetization of qualification, and being patriotic to stand with our government to develop our continent. Great words. Thank you so much, Dr. Daniel Kabani, for coming on the show today and really giving us a food for thought with regards to employment on the continent. It's been a great conversation. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you so much. You have a lovely day.
All right, then. Of course, author, entrepreneur, pharmacist, and business developer. Great conversation that we've had, but that's the much we can take on Spotlight Africa today, bringing you information all around the continent. Let's do this again some other time. I am Uyai MM. Enjoy the rest of your day.